To be able to truly discern whether a woman is cheating on you, it is not enough to look for loud evidence or blatant behavior. What is required instead is a trained attention to subtle details, those that appear ordinary on the surface, but carry unfamiliar meanings beneath. Infidelity rarely announces itself openly. More often, it slips in quietly through silent signals, slight changes in behavior, shifts in tone of voice, or small contradictions that repeat over time. And the more unusual and persistent these signs become, the greater the likelihood that a double life is being managed in secrecy. Attention, in this sense, should not be limited to her actions alone. It must also extend to her words, the way she constructs her sentences, her choice of expressions, and even the manner in which she speaks about you and about your relationship. Language is often more revealing than behavior because it exposes what the psyche is trying to conceal, even when the performance is convincing. In many cases, a woman resorts to what can be described as social programming, using her emotional intelligence and communication skills to persuade you that she is unquestionably loyal, that you are the ideal man in her life, and that others hold no real importance to her. This psychological game is not built solely on direct lies, but on creating a false sense of trust and reassurance, one that makes doubt seem like your own mistake rather than a legitimate possibility. This is where the danger of this strategy lies. It confuses your intuition and pushes you to ignore the warning signs. Therefore, if you want to understand the truth and move closer to uncovering deception, you need to calmly and consciously recognize the core signs of marital infidelity, not as ready-made accusations, but as psychological and behavioral indicators. This also includes paying attention to the most common phrases used when a woman is secretly involved in another relationship, or when she engages in subtle flirtation away from her official partner. A deep understanding of these signs does not only provide clarity, it protects you from falling into illusion and gives you the ability to see what is happening clearly, free from emotional manipulation. Sign 1. Boundaries and personal space. When a woman seeks to open channels of communication with other men, she inevitably needs two essential elements: time and space. Conversations, messages, and meetings, even when they appear innocent on the surface, require a degree of privacy that is difficult to conceal over the long term. For this reason, concealment is rarely direct or chaotic. More often, it is carried out through subtle psychological strategies whose primary goal is not only to hide the behavior itself, but to disable your suspicion and confuse your awareness. At this stage, some women resort to a form of quiet mental manipulation. They do not openly deny anything. Instead, they redefine the rules altogether. One of the most common phrases used in this context is, "I'm not obligated to justify every step I take." This sentence is not spoken casually. It draws new boundaries within the relationship and redistributes psychological power. The implicit message is clear. She is free in her actions, and any question from you can be framed as mistrust or control. If she tells you where she is, it is presented as a favor rather than a commitment, optional sharing rather than transparency rooted in closeness. Psychologically, you are pushed to adapt to these new rules and to accept space as she defines it, not as a healthy relationship requires. Another equally common tactic is social comparison, such as saying, "Even Sarah's husband lets her go to the beach with her friends because he trusts her." Here, the woman does not defend her behavior directly. Instead, she invokes an external example to legitimize it. Trust is presented as an absolute value, while any objection from you is framed as pathological jealousy or controlling masculinity. At the same time, she preserves her advantage with a short but decisive phrase. This is different. With that single sentence, the discussion is shut down. Control remains in her hands, while you are expected to trust without understanding and to accept without questioning. This psychological structure is often reinforced by a phrase that sounds mature and balanced. "This is my personal space." But what does personal space actually mean in practice? It may mean a phone that is always locked or kept on silent, frequent outings with friends without details, nighttime activities that are neither explained nor discussed, or entire areas of her life that you are not allowed to approach. The ultimate goal here is not freedom in itself, but convincing you sincerely that she is hiding nothing and that everything she does is simply a legitimate defense of her independence and sense of self. Over time, You may find yourself doubting your intuition instead of questioning her behavior. The essential point that must be understood clearly is this. A woman who truly loves does not look for excuses to distance herself, nor does she need psychological walls to protect her relationship. A loving woman naturally gravitates toward closeness, toward sharing, toward making her partner part of her world rather than a temporary visitor in it. She does not hide fundamental secrets, nor does she view transparency as a threat to her freedom. When distancing begins and talk of personal space turns into a constant tool for justification, the issue is no longer about healthy boundaries. It becomes a clear psychological signal of eroding interest, and perhaps the beginning of emotional separation and sometimes infidelity. At that stage, those grand-sounding phrases become nothing more than empty words, used to cover a much larger void than what is being said. Sign 2. Excessive focus on appearance. In some cases, a sudden and noticeable shift appears in a woman's attention to her appearance, without any corresponding improvement in intimacy with her partner. In fact, this transformation often occurs at the height of emotional distance or coldness between you. All at once, she begins going to the gym, follows beauty experts with intense interest, meticulously cares for her nails, pays particular attention to intimate details of her body, and selects her clothing, especially lingerie, with calculated elegance and clear sensuality. This heightened level of preparation is rarely random or driven solely by self-care. More often, it is directed toward the gaze of someone else, toward the attention of a specific man. When you question this change, she may respond with a phrase loaded with defensive intelligence. Should I be wearing a veil now? With this sentence, she does not answer your question. Instead, she redirects the entire conversation. You are placed in the position of the accused, while your concern is reframed as control or domination. It is a subtle form of social programming that shifts focus away from her behavior and onto your intentions, making you doubt yourself rather than reflect on the change unfolding before you. At times, she may soften the message further by adding, "I dress this way for myself." On a theoretical level, this sounds reasonable and mature. Psychologically, however, the reality is often different. A woman who chooses her lingerie with exceptional care, or who prepares herself extensively to go out with a friend, is not doing so to impress the friend. She is doing it to appear at her best before the person she expects to be present in a private space, or within the circle of his attention and gaze. It is important here to distinguish between a consistent pattern and a sudden shift. If a woman has always cared deeply about her appearance, and this has been part of her personality from the beginning of the relationship, then there is nothing unusual about it. But when this intense focus emerges abruptly, coinciding with ongoing conflicts, emotional distance, or prolonged intimacy issues between you, it becomes a psychological indicator that should not be ignored. More often than not, it reflects a search for validation and admiration elsewhere, and possibly the beginning of an emotional attachment outside the relationship. This likelihood increases during major transitional periods, changing jobs, working in an environment dominated by men, or returning to work after maternity leave. During these phases, a woman begins interacting with new faces and receiving different signals of attention. Dormant feelings are tested, emotional energy is gradually redirected away from the partner, and all of this often happens without being openly acknowledged. At this point, the change in appearance is no longer a superficial detail, but a reflection of a deeper internal shift. Sign 3. The mysterious disappearance. Over time, her behavior begins to change in a way that is difficult to attribute to a single clear event, yet it reveals itself through a recurring pattern. You suddenly notice that her working hours have become longer than usual, that her time spent with friends has increased, and that her responses to your calls and messages are no longer as immediate as they once were. Instead, replies come late, sporadically, or with an unexplained emotional coldness. This partial disappearance does not happen all at once. It gradually creeps in until it becomes a new reality that you find yourself trying to adapt to. This absence is often wrapped in a series of ready-made excuses that appear, on the surface, to be humane and reasonable, such as, "Sarah's husband left her, and I needed to be there for her. My phone was on silent. I didn't notice your calls. I was in a meeting and couldn't respond." The purpose of these justifications is not merely to explain the absence, but to preserve your sense of reassurance and convince you that everything is normal and nothing warrants concern. She is careful to present her world as coherent and well-organized, while beneath the surface there is a clear overlap between her public life and her hidden one, between what you know and what is happening beyond your awareness. In some cases, this behavior escalates into more visible signs, such as suddenly acquiring new items or receiving expensive gifts that do not align with her income or current circumstances. At that point, new explanations emerge, no less clever than the previous ones, such as, "A client gave it to me," or "I bought it on installments." At this stage, she uses her emotional intelligence and persuasive ability to anchor a single image in your mind, that she is honest, that everything is under control, and that your doubts are unfounded. Yet the truth often surfaces only later, after details have accumulated, time has passed, and emotional attachment has deepened to the point where walking away becomes painful. Many men fall here into a dangerous psychological trap: the fear of losing her. This fear drives them to cling to excuses, interpret absence with good intentions, and ignore their inner intuition as it sends repeated warning signals. And so the disappearance is believed, the absence is justified, while another relationship quietly takes shape in the shadows, out of sight, and without raising suspicion, until it is too late.